Regan, and I'm a 30-year-old First Nations Canadian citizen that grew up in a small conservative farming town an hour outside of Edmonton. Growing up, I was the only recognizable Native student in my school, which led to some teasing, but in all, my upbringing and involvement with the community has mostly been with people that are descendants of European settlers. And so, I too consider myself white in the sense of abiding to community norms and living the lifestyle. In turn, the effects this had on my social studies experience resulted in limited exposure concerning the Aboriginal experience, which my family lived and that I was currently living but couldn't recognize. This makes me rather sad because if it wasn't for the simple fact that if my blood wasn't a quarter Indian, then I wouldn't be recognized as Native at all. Really, my blood is all that connects me to my Aboriginal roots since I cannot recollect my grandmother's past culture, as I was never given the opportunity to be introduced to it either by my family or by school. If we look at family, it is because my grandmother passed away rather early in life, and so she never had the opportunity to share her knowledge with me. But the thing is, she was a residential school survivor, and from the bits I remember about her, she had become whitewashed into the Christian zeitgeist of the century, and so, while I know she remembered her Cree language and can speak it, undoubtedly there were elements even lost to her concerning her culture due to the effects of residential schools that she thus wouldn't be able to share with me. Then if we look at schools, we know that an effect of colonization has been the downplaying of Aboriginal education both in its pedagogy and understanding their history. Consequently, I couldn't make a connection to my Aboriginal past through that outlet as well, because all I was taught was how settlers came and slowly invaded Canada peacefully through treaties, on top of coloring in different kinds of map. Or put differently, social studies never did the proper job of educating me about Canada's Aboriginal history. Now, I first want to ask myself, what have you become more aware of about gaps and or silences in your social studies education, and how will your increased awareness of these aspects shape your teaching of social studies? To me, I look to my two sisters, both of whom are elementary school teachers, and I compare their approach to teaching to the one being instilled into me by EDEL, and I cannot help but recognize a striking contrast between the way Aboriginal education pedagogical practices and history is promoted within EDEL to the lack of Aboriginal acknowledgement by mainstream university teaching curriculums. In turn, I take what I see now and reflect upon my past, and I cannot help but notice the lack of voice Aboriginals have within the classroom. Specifically, Aboriginal voices are silenced in two major ways: lack of history, culture, and understanding being taught within the social studies classroom, and a lack of Aboriginal pedagogical practices being utilized to help not only just Aboriginal students, but all in general. Altogether, by recognizing these two significant gaps within our social studies program, in conjunction with my own simplistic social studies experience, combine that with my yearning to now reconnect with my Aboriginal past, it has all conglomerated within me to shape my teaching of social studies into one specific goal. I want to be a solution to society's ignorance in not just understanding Aboriginal culture and heritage, which is meek at best, but have my students gain an appreciation for the day-to-day lives people around the world live as well. How? By emphasizing three priorities coming into social studies classroom as a teacher. First, I want to introduce Aboriginal pedagogical practices to my students. I am new to nature walks and smudges, but having started both at the beginning of this semester, even though I never learned anything practical in the extent that I need to know this for the test, what both did is instill in me a calming presence from my soul through my studies and had me reflect upon my own studies. So, though I never learned anything specific, the reflections I was able to do allowed me to center myself and be prepared as a student. Second, I want to go beyond the simplistic learning I underwent as a student and be more dynamic as a teacher when being a social studies teacher. To me, this means bringing in guest speakers, elders, talking about my past and why I'm sad about it, and doing my due diligence as an academic and bringing in exciting, engaging material for students to read with. Finally, by emphasizing a more Aboriginal pedagogical and historical approach within my social studies curriculum, my goal is for students not only to understand and sympathize with the Aboriginal condition, but take said knowledge and be able to accurately assess said conditions with other people's experiences lived around the world. Social studies, as much as it should focus within Canada, should have a worldly aspect. And so, I too want my students to learn about Asia, Australia, Europe, Africa, and while there's so much to learn, I feel it is my responsibility to bring things into a concerted idea so that main themes can be taken away from my teachings. But not just themes. I want my classes to develop skills that transfer into the real world, which to me means being able to break down books, articles, videos we see in the media and understanding the real world implications. For example, I know I'll be teaching high school at some point in my career, so I want students to understand not only what they read, but who wrote it, why it's important who wrote it, implicit biases, hidden agendas and messages, and being able to properly articulate one's ideas.